For decades, millions of Christians have been taught a standard picture of the end times. Israel embraces its Messiah, and then the final prophetic dominoes fall. It's on the charts, in the books, and preached from the pulpits. But what if the Bible's most detailed prophecy on the subject says the exact opposite? What if the Book of Ezekiel reveals that the trigger for Israel's national salvation isn't a preacher or a revival, but a supernatural war so devastating that God himself must step in? The popular charts have it backward. Ezekiel shows that Israel's spiritual renewal doesn't prevent the great end-time war. It's the result of it. And understanding that one detail changes everything. Let's walk through the Book of Ezekiel and see how this ancient prophet dismantles a core assumption of modern prophecy teaching. We'll look at the state of Israel before this great war, the events of the war itself, and the stunning aftermath that God declares will change Israel and the world forever. 1. The common misconception. If you've studied Bible prophecy, you've probably seen a chart laying out the sequence of the last days. A common feature on many of these timelines is a national revival in Israel, happening sometime before or at the start of the 7-year tribulation period. The idea is that a huge portion of the Jewish people will finally recognize their Messiah, creating a spiritually renewed Israel that then faces the final trials. This belief is often pieced together from different scriptures. Passages that talk about Israel's ultimate salvation are placed early in the timeline, which seems logical. First, Israel believes, then God protects them through the end times. It creates a neat, linear story where a saved nation becomes the clear hero that God miraculously defends. This view suggests events like the preaching of the 144,000 witnesses will spark a mass conversion, setting the stage for the final act. But while this timeline is popular, it's built on an assumption that the Book of Ezekiel directly challenges. Ezekiel gives us the single most detailed, chapter-by-chapter account of the Great Northern Invasion, and the sequence he lays out is a complete reversal of this popular idea. What if the catalyst for Israel's salvation isn't a revival meeting, but a battlefield where God makes his name known through sheer power? 2. The scriptural foundation. Physical restoration first. Before we can get to the war in Ezekiel 38, we have to look at the chapters that set the stage. Ezekiel 36 and 37 establish a critical pattern. God restores Israel in stages, and the physical restoration comes before the spiritual one. In Ezekiel 36, God makes an incredible promise to a Jewish people scattered across the globe for centuries. He says, "For I will take you from among the nations, gather you out of all countries, and bring you into your own land." This is a promise of a physical return to the land first. For many prophecy watchers, this saw a breathtaking fulfillment on May 14, 1948, when Israel was reborn as a sovereign state. Just as Ezekiel prophesied, the Jewish people began returning to their ancestral homeland after nearly 2,000 years in exile. Then comes Ezekiel 37, the famous vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. Ezekiel sees a valley of dry, scattered bones, and God asks, "Son of man, can these bones live?" God commands him to prophesy, and the bones rattle together, get covered with sinews and flesh, and become fully formed bodies. But there's a crucial detail. There is no breath in them. They represent the house of Israel, brought back together as a nation, but not yet spiritually alive. God then tells Ezekiel to prophesy again, this time to the breath. The breath enters the bodies, and they come to life, a vast army. God himself explains the vision. He will bring Israel out of their graves, the nations where they were scattered, and back to their own land. This two-stage process is the key. First, the physical body is formed, meaning the nation is reestablished. Second, the Spirit gives it life, meaning the nation is spiritually renewed. Today, we see Israel as a physical, political nation. The bones have come together. But as a whole, the nation has not yet turned to its Messiah. From this perspective, the breath of the Spirit has not yet entered the national body. And that's the exact state of Israel that sets the stage for Ezekiel 38:3, the divine reversal in Ezekiel 38. Now we arrive at Ezekiel 38, and this is where things get interesting. The prophet describes a massive coalition of nations, led by a figure named Gog from Magog, storming down from the far north to invade Israel. Nations like Persia are listed among them, but pay close attention to how God describes Israel at the moment of the invasion. He says Gog will attack a land of unwalled villages, a peaceful people who dwell safely. This doesn't sound like a nation on high alert. It sounds peaceful and unsuspecting. While scholars debate what dwelling safely means here, perhaps a false sense of security from a military or political treaty, one thing is clear. There's no mention of a national revival having happened yet. The nation is simply regathered in its land, just like the bodies without breath in Ezekiel 37. As this terrifying army descends on the mountains of Israel, it seems like no one can stop them. But then God steps in. He says, "My fury will show in my face." God declares that he will intervene directly and supernaturally. He triggers a massive earthquake, the mountains crumble, and the invading armies are thrown into chaos, turning their swords on each other. God then rains down flooding rain, giant hailstones, fire, and brimstone. This isn't a battle won by the Israeli Defense Forces. This is a divine, overwhelming display of power. God makes it crystal clear that he is the one destroying this enemy, and he has a very specific reason. In Ezekiel 38:23, he says, "Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord." The main purpose of this event is for God to reveal his glory to the world, and most importantly, to Israel itself. 4. The aftermath that changes everything. The real twist, the detail that flips the popular timeline upside down, is found in what happens after the battle. Ezekiel 39 describes the total destruction of Gog's armies. The cleanup is so massive, it takes Israel 7 months to bury the dead and 7 years to burn the leftover weapons. This 7-year period is a fascinating timeline marker that leads many scholars to place this war just before the 7-year tribulation, though other interpretations exist. But the physical cleanup is nothing compared to the spiritual transformation. The climax of the entire prophecy is in the final verses of Ezekiel 39. After the victory, God makes a statement that is stunningly clear. Starting in verse 21, he says, "I will set my glory among the nations, so the house of Israel shall know that I am the Lord their God from that day forward." Do you see the sequence here? The text doesn't say Israel knew God before the battle. It says that as a result of seeing his supernatural deliverance, they will know him from that day forward. It's this divine intervention that kickstarts their national awakening. God then says that he had hidden his face from them because of their unfaithfulness. But now, after gathering and defending them, he will do something new. He finishes with this ultimate promise in Ezekiel 39:29. "And I will not hide my face from them any more, for I shall have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel." This is the moment the breath enters the bones. The pouring out of God's Spirit, signifying national salvation, happens after the Gog-Magog war. The war is the very event God uses to finally get his people's attention. He saves them not because they were already righteous, but so that they would turn to him. This inverts the common teaching. Israel isn't saved before the war. Israel faces war, is miraculously saved by God, and then the nation turns to him. 5. Why this timeline matters. So, why does getting this order right matter? It's more than just rearranging boxes on a prophecy chart. This sequence reveals the very nature of God's plan and his sovereign grace. First, it puts God's faithfulness front and center. He promised the land to Abraham and his descendants, and he brings them back and defends them there, not because they've earned it, but because he made a promise. His intervention is an act of pure faithfulness, proving his plan for Israel doesn't depend on them getting everything right first. Second, it highlights God's power as the source of salvation. In the popular model, revival is started partly by human action, preaching and believing. But in Ezekiel's model, salvation is a direct response to God's unilateral act of rescue. God acts first. He shows his glory, and then hearts are changed. Getting the sequence right also helps us distinguish this war from other end-time battles, like Armageddon at the end of the tribulation. The Israel of Ezekiel 39 is a nation whose eyes are just being opened.
Many scholars believe Zechariah 12:10, where they look on me whom they pierced and mourn, happens at Christ's physical second coming at the very end of the tribulation. Ezekiel's prophecy seems to describe a national spiritual turning that happens before that final moment. This perspective shifts our focus from watching for a revival in Israel to watching for the geopolitical alignments that Ezekiel described over 2,500 years ago. The Book of Ezekiel doesn't just give us a glimpse into the future, it gives us a profound lesson about the God who writes history before it happens. For years, many have tried to piece together the prophetic puzzle, but a critical piece has often been put in the wrong place. Israel's national salvation isn't the prequel to the Gog-Magog war, it's the grand finale. God brings his people back to their land in a state of unbelief. He allows a terrifying alliance of nations to come against them, and at the moment of ultimate crisis, when all hope seems lost, he will personally intervene in a display of glory that will shake the world. It is that very act of divine power that will cause Israel to finally know their God and receive his Spirit. This isn't just a theological debate, it's a message of incredible hope. It reminds us that God's plans aren't fragile, they don't depend on us. His faithfulness is the engine of prophecy, and his glory is the ultimate goal. So as we watch world events unfold, as we see the nations aligning and the headlines screaming, we shouldn't be filled with fear. The prophecies of the Bible aren't meant to scare us, they're meant to prepare us, proving that God is in control and his word is true. The best preparation for these events isn't building a bunker, but building your life on the rock of Jesus Christ. The same God who promises to pour out his Spirit on the house of Israel offers his Spirit to anyone who calls on the name of his Son. Turn to him, trust in him, and you can watch the signs of the times not with anxiety, but with the confident assurance that your redemption is drawing near.